Hey guys, Zach Mars here, and this is my review of Inside Job. Okay, so this episode is interesting and also a little funny, but essentially the story goes is that, so essentially Tomoko Ridley is throwing a wedding, and I'll get to that, but also we find out that apparently, in the context of Inside Job, the whole flat earth theory is complete and utter bullshit. They kind of explain both of those right at the start. But in any case, it does open up with people protesting outside the National Air and Space Museum, and it's a movement of flat earthers. It's people who staunchly believe in the flat Earth theory, and of course, the flat Earth theory, as we find out, according to JR, who was watching the whole thing along with the department heads, He points out that conspiracy theories are getting stupider every day, and it's at this point where Gigi reveals that actually it is in fact completely and utterly preposterous that the flat Earth theory is true, because she proceeds to go on to explain how the flat Earth theory is made up. It's, or at least the context of in the context of Inside Job. She goes on to they basically, the way they explain is that the Earth is actually hollow, not flat. So yeah, I guess that makes a bit of sense. Hollow Earth theory is also a thing, but there are more plausible. It's a more plausible theory than a flat Earth, because since obviously we know the flat Earth is obviously the flat Earth theory is obviously fake. We know that the Earth is round. We know that that's impossible for the Earth to be flat. But yeah, the flat Earthers don't understand that, so they're just protesting things. But in any case, after explaining that little tidbit about how the Earth is hollow, Glenn then proceeds to go on to explain how it feels like they're cutting too much funding from schools, because obviously it feels like there's not enough science there's not enough people aren't learning specifically how the Earth is flat, how the Earth is actually hollow instead of flat, and he does blame it on schools. But and you can see at this point where Reagan barges in, holding a wedding cake and arguing with somebody over the phone, claiming that if they make a mistake, she knows where their friends and family are, and that she will not hesitate to go after them. At which point she hangs up and reveals she was actually on with a florist, and she sets the cake down, and of course she then proceeds to reveal that she's been throwing a wedding for her mother. Which of course Gigi is very happy about, pointing out that obviously a wedding between two people is a very solemn thing, and that's and she always points out that it always makes her tear up. But then Reagan goes on to explain that actually Tomoko is marrying herself, which I don't think is a thing, but Reagan just cites it as the fact that it's just this elaborate stunt to once again piss off her dad. And of course, this is at this point where Mike reveals that actually he thought it was to Tomoko's on the invitation, and then he pulls out the invitation to show that it is in fact a picture of Tomoko looking at a mirror of herself. But he just assumed that Tomoko was a lesbian and he was racist, so he didn't think it was actually Tomoko twice. So yeah, at least until Reagan explained it. But yeah, But yeah, she does go on to explain how the wedding is actually going to be a lot stressful, and JR points out that reveals that he's actually hoping to actually help make it as smooth as possible, revealing that he actually did give Reagan his yacht to use for the party, which she does appreciate, and of course JR also points out that since it's kind of a company thing, that he actually wants everybody to be there. And of course, everybody is happy to be there, including Glenn, who points out that he's actually good at providing security for places. So obviously, he's an ex-soldier that got turned into a Dolphin Man. But yeah, he also explains how he used to do that for his own wedding, which may have helped contribute to the fact that his wedding his marriage, of course, didn't really go well. It makes perfect sense when you think about it, but yeah, he goes on to explain how he kept doing drug searches against everybody, and eventually he realized that they just did not need the registry that was actually there. So yeah, it implies that everybody brought drugs and Glenn kicked them all out, and so there was nobody at the actual wedding. But you know, Glenn, it makes perfect sense. He's Glenn. But in case, it's at this point where JR pulls Brett aside, and then proceeds to reveal that actually he's not just doing it, not just letting Reagan borrow his yacht out of the courtesy of his own card. And then reveals that actually his yacht is apparently a money pit, and that he's sinking so much money into it that according to himself, he's in danger of going from being the 1% down to the 2%, which yeah, he's not. That's not a bad thing. If he's still in the upper 2%, I mean, sure, he's not one of he's still among the richest people in the world. But that seems like a very arbitrary thing to be complaining about. The fact that you have to spend so much money that you are no longer the upper 1% of the richest people in the world. Oh no. But in case he then proceeds to reveal his plan to Brett, which is that he wants Brett to actually pose as a billionaire to pretend to buy his yacht, so that he can actually impress the other billionaires that he's bringing, and then also convince them to actually buy his yacht so that he can make a lot of money off of it. And of course, when Brett shows enthusiasm about being on a solo mission, JR points out that if he does it right, he'll give him an enthusiastic attaboy, which isn't really good payment for a private job, but Brett is happy about it, so I'm not going to argue about it much anymore. But in case, after finding out that she's been doing a very good job of covering up the whole thing, she then proceeds to explain how the entire wedding needs to go perfectly, or it could very well backfire. And of course, Mike senses the fact that she's a little bit stressed and needs a bit of a massage. But then he accidentally reads her mind while doing so, and quickly discovers that she's just so stressed that it actually quite quickly freaks him out. And he points out that if they aren't, that this is a very razor-thin margin for error, and if it doesn't go perfectly, they're all screwed. So at which point he proceeds to collapse after knocking himself out. But in case we then proceed to cut to Reagan's apartment where it's currently raining, and she walks in with a bunch of groceries and states that that's raining out there, and it's probably a good idea to just stay in there for the next 2 to 3 days. And at which point she walks in, and what we quickly discover is that as we find out, and of course it's revealed that Rand is actually in a chat room with the flat earthers, and of course they quickly panic when they see Reagan, because they haven't seen a girl in a while, according to Rand. But then Rand asks him rather nervously why he's in a chat room with a bunch of flat earthers, and he proceeds to go on to explain actually it was him who created the flat Earth theory. He explains that he actually got into a bet with JR about how there was possibly a theory that was so stupid that he could make a theory so stupid anybody would believe it. And of course the flat Earth theory wound up being that theory, but then he reveals that it actually worked a little too well, and now he just does it to egg them on and piss off JR, which Reagan concludes is most likely a perfect activity to tie him over for the rest of the weekend. And then she proceeds to make herself scarce and leave after faking that she's going on a mission. She pretends to leave and do all that, but in actuality, she walks outside, and we discover that actually she's keeping Rand inside using rain machines. And then she walks over to a van and tells the two guys inside that he bought it, and of course, at this point where the two men reveal that they have actually intercepted his invitation and tell her good luck at her brother's wedding. At which point Reagan starts laughing hysterically, pointing at obviously she's very stressed and not happy about it. But she then proceeds to go into her car and drive off, still laughing. At which point she arrives at the wedding, and essentially Reagan is running the whole show. She's pretty much just running the wedding and very much working, which of course we quickly find out Tomoko isn't happy with her about, pointing out that she should really stop doing what she's doing and just let herself be. But of course Reagan points out that obviously she's working, she can't do that. And of course points out that she's obviously trying to just keep everything on track. And but of course Tomoko points out that that obviously she's the reason she then reveals that the reason she's actually marrying herself is because she wants to set a positive example for Raijin to actually do something for herself rather than for other people, which is absolutely very narcissistic, but she does have a bit of a point. You do need to sometimes do things for yourself instead of other people, which I mean, not from Tomoko's perspective, not really the best thing, considering she's very narcissistic and very much, obviously, is just one of those people who's very self-absorbed, very self-centered. So, you know, from her, not the best thing, but you do need to sometimes take time for yourself. Don't overstress yourself, don't overwork yourself. And but meanwhile, we find out that Glenn is actually the security. We've already explained this, but Glenn's the security guard at the thing, and he's making sure to keep the event clean. And it's at this point where Andre walks in with a briefcase, and of course Glenn pulls out one of those security wands where he waves it and they try to find illegal things. One of those. He waves one of those around Andre, and he picks up something. So he asks Andre to open his suitcase, and Andre reveals that he just has a bunch of illegal drugs inside. And of course, Glenn points out that that's no problem, and then he proceeds to chuck the entire suitcase into the water, where it kills several fish, and the one guy that was in there scuba diving winds up getting very, very high and starts cuddling one of the fishes. And of course, this causes Andre to become very stressed and panicked out, and Glenn tells him that it's merely that's merely a protocol, and that while he would love to have helped let him bring in the drugs as a friend, obviously he can't do that. He put his duty first, and he points out it's a clean event and they can't have any drugs inside the place. And of course both Gigi and Mike walk in, and Mike points out that he's actually never seen Andre sober, so he's curious how this is going to go. And of course Andre points out that it'll probably be fine, but it'll either be interesting or not interesting. And then he proceeds to run over panically to one of the helium balloons and tries to suck the helium out of it, but Gigi and Mike grab him before he could, and they drag him off. So yeah, Andre has an interesting time in this episode, but in case they then proceed it's at this point where they then proceed to actually start looking into where Reigen starts ordering people around to making sure they serve hors d'oeuvres. But it's also at this point where Tomoko comes over to Glenn, and she tells him to take 5, essentially, pointing out that she actually hired her own private security guard, which shows up right next to her, and she tells him that she wants somebody more fit, but at which point Glenn points out that there's no one more fit than him, and that he's in perfect fighting form. But he then and it's at this point where his stomach actually just extends, and he winds up busting a button on his blazer, which winds up bouncing around and ricocheting off of everything, and hitting a waiter, which causes the waiter to fall off and collapse. And Glenn just cites that's just evidence that he's combat ready, pointing out that he just took out a waiter from 30 feet. Without even touching him. So, but Tomoko points out that that doesn't really prove anything, and then proceeds to tell him to take 5 anyway, and he then proceeds to spend the rest of the episode in the snack bar, where he just kind of chills out by the shrimp bucket, which makes him being very depressed about it, but because he wanted to be security and he can't anymore. Meanwhile, Reigen is checking in with all of her teammates to make sure everything is going smoothly, but what we quickly find out is that, in addition to everything going on, she then proceeds to point out that she then proceeds to ask Glenn how he's doing, and of course Glenn is very upset by the fact that he has to eat shrimp out of a bucket, and he's lost pretty much all of his dignity. And it's at this point where Siegel tries to snatch those shrimp from him and succeeds. And then curses him out which we see because of subtitles, but he tries to hold on to the shrimp because it's the last piece of dignity he still has. But of course she then also orders Barrow around to actually help with refreshments and other things. And of course Reigen continues to do that. Meanwhile, we actually do see JR walking a bunch of billionaires around to actually show them the yacht and all the things he installed, and we really find out why it's a money pit. He keeps installing, well, rich people things. He installed a vineyard on the yacht. That's not a thing you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to install a bunch of. It's a yacht. It's not supposed to be like this big. I mean, I get it. Yachts in some cases are definitely somebody's home away from home, but you're not supposed to install a bunch of things that you don't need on it. It's literally just, I mean, any sort of ship actually. Just the bare necessities that you need to get yourself around the ocean, and that's it. Just like food, water, shelter. That's all a boat is. You just need to make sure you bring all those things. And usually the bigger boats for catering and stuff that do that, like cruise ships and things like that. They do those. But yeah, in any case, that's why JR is blowing money on it. He's putting things on the boat that aren't supposed to be on the boat. But in any case, this is this point where Brett actually shows up in his billionaire disguise, calling himself Joffrey Game of Thrones, which is a hilarious name. But he then proceeds to come down. He then proceeds to slide down the banister and tells all the billionaires that he's actually interested in the yacht and that it probably is too much for them to spend. And of course, at this point, where of course JR asks him what exactly it is that he thinks he's doing, and he then proceeds to explain how he's actually method acting to become a billionaire. And explains how he actually created a backstory about how Joffrey is actually a prince from a faraway kingdom whose parents are first cousins. So yeah, which and of course JR is just embarrassed and annoyed by the whole thing. And he just tells Brett not to embarrass him in front of any other billionaires. But it's at this point where a large Amazon package arrives by drone, and then Jeff Bezos walks out of the box. So yeah, Jeff Bezos shows up as one of the billionaires. He's if you don't know, he's the owner of Amazon. If you don't know who Jeff Bezos is, I don't know who to tell you, but yeah, Jeff Bezos is the owner of Amazon, and he walks out of the box. And of course he points out that he and JR greet each other, and JR asks him, and of course JR and Jeff actually start talking to each other about the yacht. But it's at this point where Brett shows up, and tells Jeff that it's probably too much for him to afford. At which point Jeff notices that obviously Brett is wearing 3 monocles, and the two immediately hit it off, pointing out that they are obviously very rich and very wealthy individuals, and they start talking and becoming fast friends, which is funny. But also, meanwhile, Andre is notably having a very interesting time regarding the actual wedding, going sober whole thing, because he doesn't work sober. That's his whole thing. He huffs biochems and a bunch of other things. So when we see him sober, not only is he repeating the same thing over and over again, namely that he tells the same story about his Skyrim, about his Elder Scrolls RPG cosplay that he did once. And of course, to the point where both Gigi and Mike have heard it way too many times. And it proceeds. Mike, of course, they point out that obviously he's telling the same story way too many times, and that he's the only person they know that does that while not sober. And of course, Andre points out that he's sorry about it. But also, what we find out is that the drugs that he constantly takes were also doing more help than harm. Because as we find out, while sober, he has Tourette's and OCD. So he'll randomly blurt out things. Namely, he blurts out that Gigi looks lovely, which he is a little confused about because he doesn't normally compliment her. But also he points out, but also he starts frantically counting all of Mike's tentacles, which of course they point out that they need some drugs almost immediately. Meanwhile, Rand is still very much in his meeting with his flat earthers, and he also proceeds to tell them the coordinates about where the edge of the Earth is, since they are revealed to have bought a boat. And we find out is that they're led by a man named Harold, but he tells Harold that where he can go, and just pulls out the Powerball lottery. He just pulls out a Powerball and tells and claims that that's the coordinates. But as he's doing that, he continues to look through all of the He looks through the bag of groceries that Reagan found, and what we find out is that she actually left behind her day planner as well as a brochure for sandals, which he points out nobody in the family actually goes to Sandals, so he actually looks through the brochure and her day planner, and quickly discovers that she's actually been making preparations for Tomoko to get married, and this causes him to become very upset and very angry. But then realizes that Harold actually said he had a boat, so he asked Harold if he can take him to somewhere, and of course Harold agrees to do that. Meanwhile, the wedding is then in full swing. Obviously, since Tomoko was marrying herself, she just walks up to the altar, and then Reagan places down a mirror, and I forget what the woman's name is, but of course she proceeds to claim that she and Tomoko are best friends, and that proceeds to go into the wedding ceremony where they then start. They then start talking about the whole thing about marriage and all those things. But as they're doing that, Rand actually barges in and says he objects, which of course causes Reagan to become angry and upset that he wound up at the wedding anyway. But and of course she reveals that, and of course she's also more angry with him about the fact that he brought flat earthers with him. But of course Tomoko is angry to see Rand, and the two of them start going at each other. With Rand saying that he'll rip the groom's lips off, whereas Tomoko just points out that she's actually just marrying herself to kind of be a self-rejuvenating thing. And of course the two start arguing about that. But and of course this is this point where Mike, after seeing this, then concludes that he now realizes why Reagan is such a mess. Obviously, her parents are just awful people, and they're just terrible. And of course, Reagan immediately goes in to break it all up, and then proceeds to tell them that obviously it was supposed to be go all so smoothly, and that now they're just fucking everything up. And of course, she then proceeds to point out that obviously this isn't the time or place for them to be arguing, and tells her dad that he needs to go. At which point Harold asks why they aren't at the edge of the earth yet, and it's at this point where Reagan then proceeds to come clean with them and tell them that they are using that actually her dad tricked them, and that there is no flat earth. And then proceeds to go on to explain how he's obviously tricking them. And of course Harold trusted him because he trusted Rand, because obviously Rand is a man of science. He believed that it was nice to have a man of science backing their claws. But of course when he finds out that Rand has actually been lying the whole time, he becomes upset with them, and then proceeds to tell him that. And of course, Reagan then proceeds to clarify that actually the Earth is hollow, and he'd be more than happy to take him there. But of course, Harold is just upset about the fact that he actually was not going to be taken to Hollow Earth and to Flat Earth specifically, but was lied to. And then he and his friends proceed to pull out a bunch of guns and hold the entire boat hostage so that they can actually go to the edge of the Earth, which of course Rand is surprised about, but of course, Reagan points out that obviously they're grown men who still use chat rooms, and she points out that of course they have guns. At which point they proceed to take everybody hostage, and then Harold in the process also notices that Barrow and Mike, and realizes that he's actually encountered people from the deep state, and that all of his theories were right, and also believes that Mike is an alien. And when Mike tries to correct him, he just tells him that it's a lot easier to just call him an alien. So which Mike obviously is offended by, but of course is this point where Reagan proceeds to actually, and they also take out the radio so that nobody can call for help. But of course Reagan is quick to get kind of spring into action. She immediately excuses herself to actually go and climb into the photo booth, and then proceeds to call Glenn and tell over the intercom and ask him where he is, and he of course is still by the snack bar. But she tells him that he needs to get ready to spring into action, because obviously there's flat earthers on the boat. And while she's confused what their overall goal is, they point out that they've actually hijacked the boat and are actually trying to take it over. And Glenn immediately springs into action after learning about uninvited guests. So Of course, they point out that he's more than happy to take her orders, and she then tells him that there's actually a vent that he can easily crawl through to actually get to the area where everybody is, and he immediately jumps in while Reagan tries to takes a harpoon, and of course also while all of this is happening, and what we find out is that Harold is very determined to get to the flat Earth. And he claims that if they don't get to the flat Earth soon, he will start killing hostages every hour. And he immediately starts with the richest man in the room, with the richest man in the world, which, as it turns out, he believes is not Jeff Bezos, but actually Brett, who is obviously lying about his wealth. Obviously, he made all of that up for the sake of a bit to help JR and help him sell his boat. And of course, what we find out is that obviously quote unquote Joffrey is very confused about the whole situation and asks about Jeff Bezos, but of course Harold points out that Jeff Bezos is actually the second richest man, which offends Jeff because obviously he owns one of the biggest corporations in the world. Obviously he's the world's richest man, but he becomes offended when he finds out he's only second, which is yeah, I would be too if I were one of the hardest working. Well, maybe not hardest working, but maybe owner and CEO of one of the biggest and most hardest working corporations in the world. Just because Amazon is a massive delivery service. Of course, Jeff is gonna have a lot of money, and that's how he became the world's richest man. But of course, it's at this point where Brett, realizing that he needs to continue to commit to the bit, does point out that though at this point both of them have so much money that pretty much any sort of wealth they have is arbitrary. He does point out that obviously he is the richer man and volunteers to be taken downstairs to be held as a hostage. Which when JR whispers at him what he thinks he's doing, Brett merely responds that if Jeff Bezos dies, he can't buy JR's boat, and JR decides to honor his sacrifice. And Brett is dragged downstairs into a downstairs room. And meanwhile, Reagan is trying to spring in action and trying to get Glenn to actually ambush people and land on top of them. But what we quickly find out is that Glenn actually got stuck in the vent. And she points out that she can't, and which of course causes Reagan to become upset, pointing out that obviously she can't do it all herself. At which point, Tomoko pointed out that she could have had a podcast one at a time and that she didn't need to do it herself. Which of course Reagan points out that she's not looking for a lecture right now. But this winds up getting the attention of Harold, who immediately grabs her and ties her up to a chair because obviously she's trying to do some things. And of course, at this point where Rand and Tomoko start arguing about each other about how obviously they feel like they point out that obviously it's all each other's fault, which of course isn't a thing, but it's this point where Harold finally gets frustrated with them arguing back and forth, and tells them that if he wanted to hear parents arguing, he would have stayed at home, and of course at this point where Reagan actually gets a brilliant idea to actually distract Harold long enough that she can actually fix the radio and go for help. She then proceeds to conclude that if she doesn't let Tomoko finish her wedding and lock Rand in a room downstairs, that obviously she'll never take him to see the flat Earth. And of course, Harold actually winds up relenting to her request and does untie Reagan and holds her and Tomoko at gunpoint, while also telling all of his flat Earth friends to actually lock all of the other deep state people up. And of course they bring Rand and all the other deep state people downstairs. Which of course, but it's at this point where Reagan where the wedding then proceeds to take off, and while they're doing that, of course, all at gunpoint, of course, because Harold is using a gun to threaten people, but of course, it's all at gunpoint, and Brett, and it's at this point where Jeff and JR start talking with each other, and of course Jeff Bezos is obviously very upset about the fact that he's actually the second richest man in the world, and that it's such an embarrassment. But of course, JR points out that obviously Joffrey saved his life, and Bezos points out that he does have a point, and and also points out that because of the balls on him, he's actually concluding that he's actually going to use he actually is going to buy JR's boat. At which point, it's at this point where they actually wind up getting into the, I had the ring stuff, but, where they talk to the ring bearer, but, Reagan makes a big play about how she actually forgot the ring and proceeds to leave to go get it, which, is, of course, is a lie, and it's just an excuse for her to go and break into the radio room. And she does so by rigging several of the Amazon Alexas that Jeff Bezos brought with him, and modifies them into bombs, which then proceed to blow up and take out the two guys guarding the radio room. At which point she then proceeds to run in and fix it, and starts fixing the radio, and points out that once she gets it back on track, she can then proceed to go on her trip to Bora Bora once she gets everything all sorted out. And she does start fixing the radio. Meanwhile, Rand actually winds up rallying the other Deep State folks to actually help him take out the Flat Earthers. Pointing out that he's gotten sick of them, but also he's gotten sick of the fact that Tomoko is trying to marry herself, and he kind of wants to kill two birds with one stone. So he asks him who's with him, and we also see Andre mumbling in a corner about how he could have written screenplays and that it's not hard. And of course he's sober, so he's currently freaking out by the fact that he's not sober. But and of course he's freaking out, so of course Mike concludes that it'll actually be better than nothing, and they all take up a weapon. Brett actually winds up taking up a comically large globe, since they all got locked in the same room, and they immediately bust out and start a whole riot thing where they actually wind up fighting each other, and of course, Brett is the first one to throw his globe because it's massive and he uses it as a bowling ball to take out some of the people. And of course from there, everybody starts fighting against each other. Gigi winds up trying to take an assault rifle away from one of the other Flat Earthers, which winds up freeing Glenn from the vent while also completely missing him. Don't think about it. But she winds up miraculously saving Glenn from the vent, and he lands on top of the guy she was fighting, and he winds up joining the fray as well, and everybody starts fighting. And Reagan doesn't notice all of this at first. She's currently giving out her coordinates to actually call somebody for help. But then the radio actually gets shot mid-transmission after she gives the coordinates, and then she looks out to discover that it's just complete and utter chaos. And unsurprisingly, Rand and Tomoko are currently fighting each other. So she immediately runs out and yells at her parents, pointing out that obviously it's complete fucking chaos, and tells them that for once she actually is going to take a page out of Tomoko's book, and she is going to finally do something for herself. And then she proceeds to take a bite of a wedding cake, walk over to a boat, and then proceeds to leave so she can make her flight to Bora Bora, which Harold quickly picks up on, and he immediately runs over to the boat and jumps in after her. While with Rand and Tomoko coming after them, trying to quote unquote save her, which even though they're just trying to outdo each other to save her, and they wind up falling off the boat with her. But also in the process, Harold winds up shooting off one of Mike's tentacles, which Andre winds up grabbing, and he winds up licking it. So yeah, in case Harold and then proceeds to insist that Reagan takes him to the flat Earth. To the edge of the world, and she ultimately has no choice but to relent, since obviously he's holding her at gunpoint. And of course, they proceed to drive off in the boat, and she proceeds to, and then she proceeds to point out that obviously she starts and then Tomoko and Rand start going after each other, and start sarcastically pointing out that obviously the flat Earth is. With Rand pointing out that obviously he didn't think anybody was this stupid about the fact that he can't believe that it's actually a hollow Earth instead of a flat Earth, and Tomoko yells at him for that, obviously pointing out that obviously he shouldn't be sarcastically mocking somebody with a gun. But of course Rand points out that she doesn't really have much of a better idea, and of course at this point where Reagan then proceeds to point out that tell them both to shut up, and then proceeds to point out that she's going to be taking them to specific coordinates, and she keeps repeating them into her headset, which while also making it seem like she's talking to Harold about where she's taking him. But and of course all of them, and of course all the other heads, studio heads, department heads, they're all standing over, hoping that Reagan is actually okay. And it's at this point where Glenn remarks that he can still hear her now. And he then proceeds to pull open it, and then it's at this point when Gigi grabs his headset, realizing that he's actually just hearing Reagan talk through a headset, and she hears the coordinates talking to them, and they point out that's where she's leading them, and at which point Andre proceeds to crawl out from under a table, which revealing that he actually had started licking on Mike's tentacle, and that enabled him to finally, become a little high, so he can actually start functioning again. And of course, Mike is upset about the fact that wasn't pointing out that wasn't his tentacle to lick. But of course, at this point, we're obviously Andre then pulls out he pulls out a table cover, and he starts scribbling on it. He starts scribbling his thoughts and other things on it to try and convey what he's doing. And he reveals that where Reagan is actually taking him is actually the cap for the Hollow Earth. And of course, Gigi points out that makes perfect sense. They can't take Harold to the edge of the Earth, but they can make him think he's going to the edge of the Earth. But of course, at this point, and of course, it's also at this point where Jeff Bezos runs in the bathroom, pointing out that obviously he's had enough, and now the deal is off that he's not going to buy JR's boat, and he leaves during all the chaos. But of course, JR points out that but of course, at this point where this handsome-looking man in a suit with a British accent, and he becomes a major character next episode. So I will discuss him in more detail later. But he winds up showing up, pointing out that he got the SOS, and he's there to help. At which point JR asks him to give him a satellite phone, and he proceeds to call the people his people at Cognito Inc. and tell them to open the cap to Hollow Earth. But it's at this point where Andre points out that if they open the cap to Hollow Earth, Reagan is going to fall into it because it's just going to open all the source to all the ocean, and everybody's just going to fall in. So of course JR immediately tells Glenn to go off and go help her, and he does. He winds up jumping overboard and uses dolphin power, his dolphin anatomy, to swim as fast as he can. And of course, eventually at one point he winds up getting tired, and he uses his quote unquote ocean powers to summon several seals to actually help him get to the boat faster. Meanwhile, Reagan is actually on her way to the capstone, and she tells them to stop. Arguing, but also points out that they're almost there. And at which point the cap actually winds up opening. And of course, Harold is very much in awe over the fact that he's actually going to be able to remarking that he's actually finally able to see the edge, and does point out that finally he has validation for all the things for all of his theories and all of the things that he thinks were right. When in actuality it was a made-up thing, but of course he doesn't know that, even though they explained that to him several times. And of course they proceed to bring, and of course at this point where obviously he tells them to, where of course Reagan winds up getting sucked into a whirlpool because obviously all the ocean water is draining and she can't get too close to it. But she winds up starting to go over the edge, and Harold kind of keeps pushing her to go forward, even though she tries to go back full throttle in the opposite direction so they don't go in. At which point Glenn winds up saving them by pushing himself in between the boat and the cap of Hollow Earth, and he winds up just pushing the boat back. But of course, it's at this point where Harold points out that obviously this isn't what he wanted, and he points out that he actually wants to go over the edge, and actually remarks that he can finally go to Australia now, which of course Reagan, everybody points out is obviously not a thing. But even though Harold points out that he believes that it'll just wrap him around on the other side like a Pac-Man maze, which isn't how that works either. But of course, Reagan once again explains how he can't go down there because obviously there's mole people, there's krakens, there's a whole bunch of other things down there that he shouldn't be down there for, and that will probably kill him. But he doesn't buy it, and asks him what they take him for, and asks him if they think he's an idiot, and then proceeds to jump into the cap for Hollow Earth, with Tomoko pointing out that it's for the best, and Rand telling Reagan that that the mole people will probably worship him like a king. At which point she proceeds to pedal back to the boat, and they continue to argue about their old self-centeredness. At which point Reagan tells them to finally shut up, pointing out that it's the least they can do for making her miss her flight. At which point she pulls out her ticket to Bora Bora and rips it up because since she obviously missed it now. And of course, they finally realized that they were actually being too selfish, and that they weren't putting they were kind of putting their own needs. But it's at this point where Rand actually winds up standing up, and he then points out that they can actually do something to actually fix that problem, and does point out that they actually have a bride and a witness, and then proceeds to ask Tomoko to remarry him. Which, of course, Reagan immediately shuts down by having with Glenn's help, and of course, Glenn just has his seal friends just drag Rand out into the ocean, so he can't actually interfere with the wedding anymore. At which point, Reagan then proceeds to have a wedding for Tomoko and has her marry herself. And she has the power invested in her by the deep state, so it works out. But she, of course, Tomoko winds up marrying herself for spiritual renewment, and of course she's very happy. And of course they wind up kissing the bride, which is just Tomoko trying and failing to kiss herself, because obviously that's not how that works. Meanwhile, Reagan eventually arrives back on the rescue boat, and where she meets with the obvious British agent, and she immediately starts flirting with him, pointing out that she is going to finally do something for herself for once, and then immediately kisses him. Meanwhile, the rest of the department heads, they look out over JR's boat, and of course, JR points out that now he's finally going to be able to capitalize off his insurance claims for his own boat. At which point a giant kraken emerges and tries to eat the boat. But it's at this point where Gigi points out that nobody's seen Jeff Bezos in a while, and sure enough, he's still in the bathroom. He didn't leave, and he winds up getting eaten by a kraken. Of course they can't help with the fact that Jeff Bezos is dead, with JR making a joke about how he was in his prime, which is an Amazon Prime joke if you don't get it, but I'm sure everybody gets it. But in case they start laughing, and that's where the episode ends. Jeff Bezos fucking dies. So yeah. But in any case, yeah. With this episode, Tomoko has officially quote unquote married herself, and also because of that, the flat Earth. They also make comments about how the flat Earth theory is just complete and utter nonsense, which of course it is. Of course the Earth isn't flat. We know this for years. We know this for centuries, millennia, however long. The point is, we eventually got good with science. We eventually figured out that the Earth isn't flat, and everything is just discovery by accident sometimes in science. Obviously, we saw at one point Columbus didn't even realize that he was actually lost in the wrong place, but it's one of those things where people eventually figure it out, except unless you're a flat earther and you believe that the Earth is flat, which obviously it isn't. But in any case, the episode is just funny for that reason. Obviously, flat Earth it's not a real thing, but that's not a theory. That's a real thing. That's not a real thing. Don't believe in that. But in any case, that's gonna do it for my review of what is it, Inside Job. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion over in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that are my way of saying thanks. So be sure to check those out. Links down in the description. In any case, yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Also, be sure to go check out my Twitch. I try to stream every Saturday and Sunday. Didn't work out this weekend, but I'm trying to stream Saturdays and Sundays so I can actually go for Twitch affiliate. So anybody who can help me with that, very much appreciated. Please go check those out. Link as always is down in the description. And also, finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this video. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!